In at 5, A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. Published in 2015, A Head Full of Ghosts is a horror novel that involves an American family under strain when their 14-year-old daughter Marjorie exhibits signs of mental illness, with the story being told from the point of view of Marjorie's 8-year-old sister Mary. Now, we learn quite quickly that it is not mental illness, but is instead a demonic possession. Well, that's what we're told to believe anyway. With the family short on money, they agree to let a film crew into their home to shoot a reality show called The Possession about Marjorie and her upcoming exorcism. However, the show does nothing but tear the family further apart, and during this time, Marjorie drops a bombshell on her sister Mary that turns everything on its head. 15 years after the events, Mary recounts her tale in an interview when dark secrets surface, secrets that are absolutely terrifying. Any horror told through the eyes of a young child is haunting. Add possession into the mix and a forced reality show, well, now we have all the elements for a perfect horror novel. Now, unlike the rest of our numbers, Focus Features has optioned the rights to A Head Full of Ghosts, so here's hoping we see the story come to life on the big screen very soon. In at 4, The Fisherman by John Langan. First published in 2016, The Fisherman takes place in upstate New York in the woods around Woodstock, where Dutchman's Creek flows out of the Ashokan Reservoir, offering the promise of fine fishing and of something more, something far too absurd to be true. When Abe and Dan become fast friends after discovering their shared passion for fishing, they begin to hear rumors of the creek and what might be found there. They find themselves drawn into the tale and head towards Dutchman's Creek, where long buried secrets and a mysterious figure known as Der Fischer is said to remain. Now, The Fisherman is one of the best horror novels of not just 2016 but also the last decade. Now, sadly, this book will likely not be turned into a movie simply because John Langan took full advantage of the freedom of writing, with the narrative being wrapped in another narrative filled to the brim with giant monsters and dark magic, resembling the works of H.P. Lovecraft, specifically at the Mountains of Madness, which would be surprisingly easier to shoot, and that's saying a lot. Now, The Fisherman, though filled with horrifying elements, is about loss itself, and two men struggling to deal with their issues of loss and learning to carry on in the face of insurmountable grief. The Fisherman is a cosmic horror unlike anything that has been penned before, with its mind-bending and heartbreaking tale of love, loss and boundless horrors, making it the perfect addition to any horror lover's bookshelf. However, like I said, it's a cosmic horror and at times even more intense than the works of H.P. Lovecraft. With the right director and all the money in the world, perhaps one day it will be brought to life. I have my doubts though. In at 3, Haunted by Chuck Palahniuk. From the off, I should say that I read this novel when I was way too young, and I do not recommend, because some of these chapters and short stories in the book will linger in your mind for quite some time. One story in particular I've never forgotten. You've been warned. First published in 2005, Haunted has a plot that has a frame story for a series of 23 short stories, most preceded by a free-verse poem, with each story being followed by a chapter of the main narrative. Yeah, it's confusing and perhaps why the book has never been turned into a movie, but I still have hope. It's also written by the guy who did Fight Club, and that got turned into a movie, so there's always hope. Anyway, the main story centers on a group of 17 people who have decided to participate in a writer's retreat after seeing it posted on a bulletin board of a cafe in Oregon. Now, I won't spoil this book for you, that would just be rude. However, I will say after some things go down, the 17 individuals become trapped in the home, and in turn begin to believe that an increase in their suffering will provide better stories for when they're eventually rescued. So without the gory details, some of the characters begin to engage in self-mutilation and cannibalism, all for a more interesting story. Haunted is a novel that explores how far some people will go for their art and the suffering from isolation. Now, it's no surprise this novel has not been turned into a movie. The description alone is enough to make some people cringe, but I still have hope that one day the likes of Eli Roth will nab the rights and bring something wonderfully gory to the big screen. In at 2, The Troop by Nick Cutter. The Troop is perhaps one of my favourite horror novels of all time, and that's a bold statement, especially coming from me, but it's the truth. Published in 2014, this horror novel follows Scoutmaster Tim Riggs and his troop of boys who once a year head into the Canadian wilderness for a 3-day camping trip. Comfortable, reliable tradition that of course makes for a perfect horror story. On the first night of their trip, an unexpected intruder stumbles into their camp. He's shockingly thin, pale, and worse, ferociously hungry, in turn exposing Tim and the boys to something far more terrifying than any ghost story. A bioengineered nightmare. A nightmare that spreads through the camp faster than fear itself. Now, I will not ruin this book for you because, like I said, this is one of my favourite horror books of all time. All you need to know is that the camp intruder, the human carrier of this virus, unleashes something truly disturbing onto the camp, something that will haunt my nightmares for years to come. It's disturbingly visceral, at times painfully descriptive, and terribly sad, all at the same time. It shows us the extremes young boys will go to when they meet something beyond any of their comprehensions. Now, if you don't want to take my word for it, the book even comes with Stephen King's stamp of approval. I quote, "The troop scared the hell out of me, and I couldn't put it down." In the acknowledgements of the book, Cutter even credits King's novel Carrie as an inspiration for the structure of his book. So you know you're in for a horrifying treat from the get-go. And what makes it one of the greatest of its time, it will never ever be predictable and deserves to be made into a horror flick that we can experience visually. And finally, in at number 1, Wylding Hall by Elizabeth Hand. Published in 2015, Wylding Hall is a terrifying horror that follows a British acid folk band that hold themselves up in Wylding Hall, an ancient country home with incredibly dark secrets. It is in this terrifying English estate that the band create their album that will garner them all the success. But at what cost? Julian Blake, the lead singer of the band, disappears from within the mansion and is never seen or heard from again. So years later, the surviving members of the group, as well as a sidekick, a photographer and the band's manager, meet a young documentary filmmaker in order to tell their own versions of what went down in Wylding Hall and what really happened to Julian Blake. Of course, through the process of filming, dark secrets emerge about each member and their loved ones, making you question all of the characters you thought you could trust. Now, although the story may resemble the comfortable, familiar haunted house story, that is not the case. The book is framed as a set of interviews, something drastically unique to the classic haunted house structure. However, the interviews don't go as expected. What we expect is differing events, unique versions from different band members. But that's not the case. Each interview remains unswervingly consistent, with each person describing a ghostly young woman who was lured into the open by Julian's performance of a haunting folk song. Now, there are of course some gothic trappings, secret passageways, icy sensations, and constant uneasiness, all housed within a crumbling estate. This book is truly terrifying, take my word for it, and seeing it on the big screen would quite easily rival the fear felt in The Woman in Black and the horrifying horror show The Haunting of Hill House. Coming in at 5, The Guardian by Jeffrey Konvitz. Now, this is actually a sequel to a New York Times bestselling book, The Sentinel, but it's The Guardian that's worthy of your attention. Published in 1979, it follows satanic forces which return to an apartment building on Manhattan's Upper West Side with the discovery of a grotesque charred body and 2 other eerily linked murders. When a woman stumbles upon the body, she is raped. Her husband then begins a furious quest for revenge. Yeah, it's a lot. This book is literally filled to the brim with all the successful movie essentials. Satanic forces, revenge, passion, mystery, and a blind nun with sinister intentions. The entire book is full of hellish twists and turns, expertly articulating what happens when you come face to face with evil incarnate. Better yet, it can be read as a standalone, so don't fret if you haven't read The Sentinel first. Now, the book's predecessor has previously been adapted into a movie back in 1977 and has an impressive 6.4 out of 10 on IMDb. However, folks are feeling like it's about damn time that The Guardian finally got the adaptation it deserves. Preach. Coming in at 4, House of Bones by Dale Bailey. Published back in 2003 and written by Dale Bailey, House of Bones follows an unconventional billionaire who is determined to unlock the secrets of Dreamland, a place of human suffering that has stood empty for years. He sets about on this mission with the help of 4 strangers, however they get more than they bargained for when they come face to face with evil. Now, Dale Bailey is an incredibly gifted writer with novels that are lean with great love for the English language. Throughout the course of House of Bones, you as a reader know from the off that things won't end well for our characters, yet Bailey manages to instill ever-growing suspense throughout. The entire book is a page-turner that you can't put down. House of Bones is a stellar example of the Midwestern Gothic haunted house genre. Though not always the most enjoyable read, the book is nonetheless one of the most skillful stories ever written. Basically, it's The Haunting of Hill House but in the hood. The cinematic terror of House of Bones, complete with jump scares and creaking doors, is why this book is begging for an adaptation on the big screen. Give the people what they want. Coming in at 3, Horror Show by Greg Keane. Published back in 1996 by Greg Keane, Horror Show tells the story of a schlock horror director, Landis Woodley, who is living in a decaying mansion in the Hollywood Hills. When he abandoned the movie business after being reduced to filming peep shows, he also left a laundry list of enemies, including the IRS. However, after an avid fan, Clint Stockburn, asks to write a piece on the recluse for a magazine, Woodley agrees for the mere price of $600 cash. During the interview, Stockburn travels back in time with Woodley and hears the recollection of Attack of the Haunted Saucer, the worst movie of all time. However, what Stockburn really wants to learn about is Woodley's masterpiece. Keane fondly caricatures Hollywood's schlockmeisters such as William Castle and Ed Wood in flashback accounts of the shooting of a Z-grade movie, and the curse that befell those associated with it. The film in question is called Cadaver, a movie that was set largely after hours in an LA morgue and featured real corpses wired to walk. However, the deeper they dive in, the more terrifying the truth becomes. Is a dead Satanist possessed by the devil, reaching out beyond the grave? Maybe. The book is a wild romp and fun-filled homage to monster movies. I am patiently waiting for the day this book makes its way to our big screens. One day. Maybe. Coming in at 2, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream by Harlan Ellison. Published in 1967, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream is a post-apocalyptic science fiction short written by Harlan Ellison, first published in an issue of If Worlds of Science Fiction. The book takes place 109 years after the complete destruction of human civilization. The Cold War had escalated into World War, fought mainly between China, Russia, and the United States. During the progression of the war, the three nations created a supercomputer with artificial intelligence, capable of running the war more efficiently than humans. Now, the original book is comprised of 7 short stories, but the one we are focusing on is I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. The aforementioned AM has destroyed all of humanity except for 5 people, whom he has been keeping alive and torturing for the past 109 years. It's a disturbing and generally upsetting read that ends with, spoilers incoming, AM focusing all of its rage on one particular character, Ted, and to ensure he can never kill himself, AM transforms him into a helpless, gelatinous blob with huge eyes and no mouth that is incapable of causing itself harm, and constantly alters his perception of time to deepen his anguish. Ted's closing thoughts end with the sentence that gives the story its title: I have no mouth and I must scream. Endless chills. Can you imagine this movie on the big screen? Terrifying. Now, a little tidbit of information for fans of the short: it was actually turned into a video game which was equally as depressing. In this 1995 point-and-click adventure game, you as the player must make key decisions through ethical dilemmas that deal with issues such as insanity, paranoia, and genocide. Fun for the whole family. Am I right? And finally, coming in at number 1, Swan Song by Robert R. McCammon. Published back in 1987 and written by Robert R. McCammon, Swan Song is a horror novel, specifically a work of post-apocalyptic fiction that described the aftermath of a nuclear war that provokes an evolution in humankind. Now an ancient evil roams the desolate landscape of a ravaged America. He is a man with a scarlet eye, a malevolent force that feeds on the dark desires of countless followers. His only desire is to find a special child named Swan and destroy her. However, those who protect the girl are determined to fight for what is left of the world and keep her safe from the evil hunting her down. This book is incredible but utterly bleak and depressing. I quote, "The sky was filled with waves of moving, blinking stars. Wheels of light rolls across the darkness over the trailer court and streaks of yellow fire zigzagged upward into the haze that obscured the moon. Thousands upon thousands of fireflies were passing overhead like galaxies in motion, their signals forming chains of light that stretched from west to east as far as Swan could see. Endless missiles. A child's thoughts. Chills. Honestly, this film would be a horrifying, emotional rollercoaster on the big screen, and I'm here for it, because I love sadness." Coming in at number 5, we have the Pilo family Circus by Will Elliott. Clowns have already been ruined by the likes of John Wayne Gacy, Pennywise, and even the guy from Poltergeist, so why not tarnish their reputation even more? The Pilo family Circus by Will Elliott is the book to do just that. Following the story of Jamie, a regular 20-something-year-old from Australia, we're introduced to a fantastical world where ordinary and extraordinary collide. Jamie finds himself being stalked by a trio of sadistic clowns, Gonko, Doopy, and Goshi. He's given an ultimatum: you have 2 days to pass your audition. You better pass it, fella. You're joining the circus, ain't that the best news you ever got? He's then kidnapped and dragged headfirst into an alternate universe where the Pilo family circus lives, between hell and earth. The ringleader of the operation is Pilo, a 7-foot monster with talons and a knack for collecting teeth. With grotesque circus folk running rampant and savagery considered the norm, Jamie transforms into JJ the Killer Clown. Its carnivalesque imagery and dark themes would make for a visually appealing movie. Its storyline, though could come off as cheesy, is certainly unique and has enough depth to intrigue audiences. In the hands of the right director, the Pilo family circus would make an incredible feature film. I'm here for it. Give me them clowns. Coming in at number 4, we have Insomnia by Stephen King. It seems impossible that there are more Stephen King novels out there that haven't been adapted for TV or film, but believe me, there are plenty. We've seen It, The Shining, The Mist, Carrie, the list goes on and on. One novel that horror movie enthusiasts are missing out on is Stephen King's Insomnia, and we want this film made. What makes this book really fun is that it's connected to so many of the other pieces of work. The novel is set in Derry, Maine, the same town that Pennywise the clown terrorized in It. Mike Hanlon, a character from It, even makes an appearance. Insomnia also closely related to his series The Dark Tower, with mentions of the antagonist, the Crimson King. The novel follows Ralph Roberts, who begins to suffer from insomnia after his wife's death. As his lack of sleep worsens, Ralph's sanity comes into question when he begins experiencing things that are invisible to others. He's now able to see people's aura, and these beings he refers to as little bald doctors. Ralph comes to the conclusion that these are not hallucinations, and his friend Lois Chase also admits to seeing the same things. The pair confront 2 of these little bald doctors, Clotho and Lachesis, who are there to preserve the natural order of death. They learn that the 3rd Doctor, Atropos, is more interested in killing people and serving the Crimson King. Ralph finds himself in the middle of a battle between the forces of the purpose and the random. The novel features some high action moments that would translate well onto the big screen, like the threat of an aeroplane that's intended to crash into the Derry Civic Centre. Insomnia is certainly more of a fantasy/horror film drawing heavily from Greek mythology, but it could certainly add a little more weirdness and spice to the horror genre. Coming in at number 3, The House on the Borderland by William Hope Hodgson. Written over a century ago in 1908, this supernatural horror novel was actually praised by the iconic horror writer H.P. Lovecraft. It deals with an evil mansion, supernatural creatures, otherworldly beings, and would be absolutely terrifying on the big screen. The story begins when 2 men on a remote fishing trip in Ireland stumble upon an ancient journal, buried in some ruins near a great abyss. Within the journal is the story of an old reclusive man who inhabited the house that once stood there. Known as being evil for centuries, the home remained empty for many years before our narrator purchased it. The majority of the story is from his account. In this decrepit abode where he lives with his sister and loyal dog, the recluse experiences the mystery and evil of the home. Battling hoofed half-humans called swine things, he brings the reader on a terrifying journey with his exploration of the pit, in which the creatures emerge from. We also get to witness his travels through space and time. Or do we? The best movies are the ones that leave you wondering, was that paranormal or psychological? With this horror story, the answer is up to you. The House on the Borderland provides the perfect amount of ambiguity to leave room for your imagination to run wild. Coming in at number 2, we have The Deep by Nick Cutter. In part 1 of the series, we included The Troop by Nick Cutter, aka one of my favorite horror novels of all time, aka the one book I just talk about all the time, and everyone needs to read it. My building has a communal bookshelf in the lobby, and it's on there, but I wish I could be like, hey guys, come to this location, get the Troop, but I can't tell you where I live, so don't you want to know? It felt only right that we threw in The Deep by him too, because let's face it, he writes one hell of a horror book. Even Stephen King said The Troop scared him and was old school horror at its best. The premise of the novel is one that somewhat hits close to home right now. I'm sure you can guess why. A strange plague called the Gets is wiping out humanity on a global scale. It's causing people to forget things, small things at first, but it slowly creeps up until the host forgets how to function at its most basic level. Death is certain, and there is no cure. But below the unforgiving Pacific Ocean, deep within the Marianas Trench, lives a substance called ambrosia, which could be the key in curing this plague. The US builds a research facility 8 miles underwater, and this is where our novel takes place. The setting alone is terrifying. It's claustrophobic, dangerous, dark, and compounded by thousands of pounds of ocean water just waiting to crush crush you any moment. Even worse is the evil that lurks down there. Nick Carter novels aren't for the faint of heart. He describes the most gruesome scenes in unforgiving details and features extreme gore and body horror. Seriously, it gets really dark, but what makes this novel particularly interesting is how unpredictable the story is. You think you're getting an apocalyptic piece, and you are, but there are so many levels to this novel. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have Heart-Shaped Box by Joe Hill. Not to be confused with the Nirvana song, but it's certainly a relevant title with this novel's themes of rock and roll. Don't be fooled by this author's pen name, he's actually the son of Stephen King. This incredibly haunting story has the displeasure of living in development hell. So we want what was promised to us, please and thank you. Judas Coyne, an aging death metal rock star with a taste for the macabre, spends his time collecting morbid memorabilia like a human skull and a Mexican snuff film. In his pursuit for more creepy items, he comes across a ghoulish one that he can't refuse, an actual ghost. In a heart-shaped box, a dead man's suit arrives at his house, spirit in tow. After many strange experiences like seeing the apparition of an old man, Jude finally realizes that the evil spirit is out for his blood and has a personal vendetta against him. He finds out that he was set up and that the spirit will kill anyone who helps him. We get to see the former rock star battle the deadly spirit, and people certainly die along the way. Murder, the paranormal, vengeance, rock and roll, this book has all the makings of a great horror film. Considering the success of the TV adaptation of Joe Hill's Nosferatu, I think we need to give this one a chance. It's time Heart-Shaped Box is resurrected from development hell and made into the amazing feature film it could be.